Don't react. Don't look at him. But your man on the right, he's not yours. She said it without moving her lips, slipped the straw wrapper into his hand like she was setting down a napkin, then walked away. Alexander Bash stared at those 11 words for 3 seconds. Just 3. Then his thumb found the button on his watch, the one nobody in that dining room knew existed, and pressed it once. 30 feet away, a waitress in a black apron was refilling someone else's water glass, hands perfectly, steady heart hammering so loud she was amazed no one could hear it. She had no idea she'd just started a war. If this story has you gripping your seat already, hit subscribe, stay until the very last second, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Arya Lane did not want Table 9. She had never wanted Table 9. In 7 years at Chateau Verité, she had developed exactly 3 hard rules for surviving the job with her sanity intact. Never take a double on Saturdays, never work the private dining room, and never ever let herself get assigned to the corner table behind the frosted glass panels that the staff called Table 9 and the management called the VIP alcove, and that everyone with any sense called someone else's problem. Tonight she had broken all 3 rules inside of 30 minutes. It started with Becca calling out sick. It always started with Becca. 28 years old, gorgeous, wildly unreliable, and possessed of the specific genius of someone who knew exactly which shifts to abandon for maximum chaos. She'd sent the text at 6:53 p.m. "I'm so sorry, stomach. Thing can't make it." And by 7:15, the floor manager, Dean, was doing his red forehead circle near the hostess stand, which was Arya's signal to become very interested in reorganizing the service station. "Arya, no, I haven't said anything yet. You were going to say Table 9. Dean stopped his circling. "You're the most experienced person on the floor. Then you should want to keep me alive. It's a dinner service, not a combat zone." She had looked at him, then really looked at him the way she looked at people when she needed them to understand that she was not being dramatic or difficult, but was in fact being completely sincere. "Dean, I have worked here for 7 years. I have watched 3 different sets of men rotate through that table. I have watched what happens when something goes wrong in that corner. I know what those men carry under their jackets, and I know what the bottles of wine they order actually cost, and I know that invisible is not sufficient protection when something shifts in that room." Dean had stared at her. "It's a dinner service," he said again with slightly less conviction. She had taken the section. The man at the center of Table 9 was not what she'd expected. She didn't know his name. She almost never knew the names that went with those tables, and she preferred it that way. But she had spent enough years reading people to know the difference between a man who had power and a man who was power. The ones who had it wore it like jewelry, loud, visible, compensating. This man wore nothing. He was somewhere in his mid-40s with a face that looked like it had been through several decades of decisions and had arrived at a kind of specific earned gravity. No excess, no performance. He held the menu the way someone holds something they don't actually need, courtesy, not dependence. His voice when he ordered was low and completely even. He said please and thank you, and he made eye contact with her for exactly as long as necessary, and no longer, which meant he had been raised right and had also at some point decided to stay that way. Arya took the order, confirmed it. The wine with the sommelier passed Dean the off-menu request that made his forehead go red again, and told herself she was fine. She was not, as it turned out, fine, because on her second pass through the section, something landed in her peripheral vision like a splinter. Small, sharp, almost nothing, but once she felt it, she couldn't stop feeling it. The bodyguard on the right was wrong. Not wrong like suspicious, wrong like off frequency, like a radio signal that sounds almost right, but has just enough static underneath to make your ear catch. She'd spent her childhood inside a house where reading that frequency wasn't optional, where the difference between her father's normal quiet and his dangerous quiet was 7 years of continuous calibration. She hadn't chosen to develop that skill. She'd survived into it. She watched the man on the right on her next 3 passes, made herself be scientific about it, methodical. The one on the left, older, thick-necked silver starting at his temples, tracked the room in the pattern she recognized. Entry, exit, perimeter sweep. He'd clocked her on the first pass, tagged her as staff and non-threat, and filed her away. When she came back, he reassessed, confirmed previous assessment, moved on. That was correct behavior. That was someone who was genuinely trying to keep another person safe. The one on the right was doing something different. His eyes moved in bursts, not sweeping targeting, short, rapid triangulations that kept returning to the same 2 points at the back of the seated man's head and the angle of approach from the right side of the table. The gap between the frosted glass panel and the edge of the wall. The precise corridor through which, if you were standing exactly where he was standing, you could deliver a close-range shot and have the panel between you and the room before anyone reacted. Arya stood at the service bar and let that thought complete itself fully. Then she said very quietly to no one, "Oh no." She told herself afterward that she had considered the alternatives, that she had weighed the risks, that she had thought it through like a rational adult who understood that getting involved in whatever was happening at Table 9 would be, by any reasonable measure, the worst decision she'd made since the incident with Elise in 2019. The truth was, she didn't think at all. She picked up the pen from her apron, tore the wrapper off a straw, wrote 11 words in the smallest handwriting she could manage. "Don't react. Don't look at him. But your man on the right, he's not yours," and folded it into a square the size of her thumbnail. Her hands were completely steady. She hated that about herself sometimes. She walked back to Table 9 with a bread plate she didn't need to deliver and a water pitcher she'd already filled on the last pass, and she set the bread plate down at the corner of the table, and she refilled a water glass that was already 3/4 full, and on the way past the man at the center, she set the folded wrapper next to his hand with the same unheard-of precision she used to set down a fork. Then she walked away and did not look back. She made it 11 steps before her body registered what she'd just done. The cold hit her first, that specific flush that starts at the base of the neck and moves down the one that isn't quite fear yet, but is fear's immediate predecessor. Then her heart rate, which had been professional and controlled for the past 45 minutes, decided that it had been reasonable for long enough and began making up for lost time. What did you just do, she thought, and it wasn't rhetorical. She busied herself at a nearby two-top resetting silverware with the focus of someone defusing a bomb, while every nerve in her body engaged in active argument about whether to look at Table 9 or never look at it again for the rest of her natural life. She compromised and looked at the reflection in the glass panel of the back wall. He was reading it. She could tell from the stillness. The particular quality of a person who is holding still because they are processing, not because nothing is happening. He held the note for 3 seconds, she counted, and then his hand moved beneath the table's edge, and she saw in the reflection his thumb press something at his wrist. The thick-necked man on the left shifted his weight, just slightly, just a fraction, but in the particular direction of receiving information. Arya exhaled. Okay, he believed her, or at least he was taking it seriously. That was good. That meant she could go back to the service bar and finish her shift and never speak of this again, and the man on the right moved his hand inside his jacket. "No," she said out loud to nobody, and she was already moving. What happened in the next 9 seconds, she would spend a long time afterward trying to reconstruct in the right order. The hand came out of the jacket. She was moving toward the table, not away from it, with a serving tray in her left hand that was there because she'd grabbed it from the station without consciously deciding to, which meant her body had already made its decision before her brain had finished the vote. Alexander Bash, she didn't know his name yet, would not know it for another hour, was going down, not panicking, just descending with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact movement. The thick-necked man pivoted with a speed that rewrote her understanding of what a human body could do at his apparent age. And she swung the tray. She swung it flat and hard at the inside of the right man's forearm at the precise moment his wrist cleared the fabric of his jacket, and the contact was shockingly solid, and the sound was shockingly loud. And the gun, a compact, dark, matte finish thing that seemed to absorb light, hit the floor and slid 6 feet across the hardwood before coming to a stop under a neighboring table. The room went silent. Not gradually. Immediately. The way a room goes silent when it collectively understands that something has just happened that cannot be unhappened. Arya was standing with the tray still in her hand. Her arm was vibrating slightly from the impact. The man she'd hit was on the floor already, so the thick-necked man's knee in his back with a pressure and precision that communicated clearly that he had done this before and was prepared to do it at significantly greater length. Two more men she hadn't identified as part of the detail materialized from points around the room. The man from the center of the table stood up. He was taller than she'd registered when he was seated. He was looking at her. She started. Don't, he said quietly. She closed her mouth. He looked at the tray, at her face, at the gun on the floor, back at her face, and something moved through his expression that she couldn't read. Not gratitude exactly, not surprise exactly. Something more like the recalibration of an equation that had just acquired a new variable. What is your name? He asked. Arya. She paused. Lane. Arya Lane. Arya Lane, he said it once like he was recording it somewhere. We need to leave this room. I work here. I'm aware we still need to leave this room. She looked at the tables around her. At Dean, who was somewhere between the hostess stand and the floor in a posture she could only describe as structural collapse. I have tables. Miss Lane. The patience in his voice was the kind that had been earned through long practice. The man currently on the floor had instructions that did not end with me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood exactly what he was telling her. I need my jacket, she said. It's in the back. His mouth moved, not a smile, the architectural echo of one. He said a name, Marcus, and the thick-necked man, without releasing his knee from the situation on the floor, made a brief gesture toward a third person who moved toward the kitchen. She'd told herself during the 30-second wait for her jacket that she was simply making the rational choice, that getting into the car was safer than standing in a restaurant where a man with a gun had just been removed from the floor, that she was being practical, adult, measured. By the time the car was moving through the city and she was sitting across from a man whose name she didn't know and whose business she absolutely should not have put herself inside, she had largely abandoned that narrative. Say something, she said. Say anything, because the silence is worse than whatever the actual situation is. He looked up from the phone in his hand. We're going somewhere safe. Safe from what specifically? From the people who sent Victor. Who is Victor? The man you disarmed. Is he going to PIO? He'll be questioned, he said. And the particular flatness of that phrase made her decide not to ask follow-up questions about Victor. The more pressing concern is the scope of the network he's connected to. Victor didn't act alone. Victor was placed. Placed, she repeated. Someone inside my organization gave information about my schedule tonight, my location, my security configuration. His voice was even throughout, but something underneath it had a quality she recognized, the specific controlled register of a person managing something that could, if allowed, become extremely uncontrolled. That is the problem I'm working through at the moment. Someone on your own team sold you out. Yes. And you don't know who. Not yet. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do at night, bright in patches, dark in the spaces between, full of lives happening in directions she'd never intersect with under normal circumstances. I have a sister, she said. It came out before strategy could intercept it raw, direct the language of actual fear. Lily. She's 22. She's home. She doesn't know where I am. He didn't look up from the phone immediately. She'll be informed that you're safe. You don't have her number. We pulled your personnel file from the restaurant 8 minutes ago. He glanced up. It's thorough. She stared at him. That's necessary, he said, given that you inserted yourself into something you had no obligation to touch. I need to know who you are. I'm a waitress who made a very poor decision. You're a waitress, he said carefully, who identified a trained professional's targeting behavior from across a dining room and chose to act on it without any guarantee that you were right and without any protection if you were. He set the phone down. That is not a poor decision. That is an unusual one, Joe. How did you know? She asked. He looked at her. That I was right, she said, when I gave you the note. How did you know I wasn't just some unstable woman who... I didn't, he said simply. I knew you were right because the note was specific. You didn't say I think something's wrong. You said your man on the right. You named a side. You named a position. That level of specificity doesn't come from anxiety. It comes from observation. Arya looked at her hands. I grew up in a house where reading people wrong had consequences. A silence. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, and the delivery was so straightforward, so devoid of performance, that it was somehow more affecting than sympathy delivered with expression would have been. Marcus spoke from the front seat. She's clean, no priors, sister checks out, no connections to any known parties. A pause. Name's Alexander Bash, he added, and she understood from his tone that he was not speaking to Alexander Bash but to her. So she'd have a name to put to the situation. Thank you, Marcus, Alexander Bash said. Alexander Bash, she said quietly, testing the sound of it. Yes. Should I know that name? A beat. You might have read it somewhere, he said, which told her everything. The safe house was clean and empty in the way of places nobody loved. Functional, neutral, a bedroom, a bathroom with a working lock, a window she was told not to open. She sat on the edge of the bed in her work uniform and thought about Lily, about the apartment they shared, the one they'd clawed together out of years of bad situations and careful saving, about the life she'd spent the last 7 years building, like someone laying down one careful brick at a time, slow and deliberate, and always with one eye on the structure's stability. She thought about the straw wrapper. 11 words, written on a piece of paper the size of a fortune cookie fortune, handed to a man she'd never met. She had known in that strange, wordless way that the body sometimes knows things before the mind catches up, that she was making a choice she couldn't reverse. She had picked up the pen anyway. The question she kept returning to in the long dark of that unfamiliar room was the same one she'd been asking herself in various forms for most of her adult life. Why do you do this? Why do you step into it? Every time there's a door you could walk past, why do you walk through it? Why can't you be the person who looks away? She didn't have a good answer. She had a true one, which was worse. She couldn't look away because she had spent a childhood in a house where everyone looked away, and she had decided very young in the specific, clear-sighted way that children sometimes decide things that anchor the whole rest of their lives, that she would never be one of those people. It had cost her over the years. She suspected it was about to cost her considerably more. The knock came at 2:14 a.m. It's Marcus. She crossed the room, opened the door. He was holding 2 coffees, extended one without ceremony. She took it. Couldn't sleep, she said. Don't much. He leaned in the doorway, and she registered again how much of him was steadiness, the quality of a person who had absorbed a great deal and was no longer knocked off center by it. You should try. Tomorrow will be long. What happens tomorrow? Mr. Bash wants to speak with you. Before we hear back on Victor. About what? Marcus looked at her for a moment with something she could only call careful honesty. About where you fit in the picture. I don't fit in the picture. I'm a witness by accident. Witnesses by accident, he said quietly, don't identify a planted security threat from 30 feet away based on eye movement. She held the coffee with both hands and said nothing. You did good tonight, he said. I mean that straightforwardly. I swung a tray. As you swung a tray at the right moment in the right direction with the right force, he said. After reading a situation correctly that 3 trained men missed, he straightened from the doorway. Sleep if you can. He left. She closed the door. Stood in the middle of the room with her coffee and thought about where you fit in the picture meant, about what the morning would look like, about Alexander Bash's voice when he said the people who sent Victor that controlled flatness over something with considerable depth and heat underneath, about the photograph she didn't know was coming, about the name she didn't know yet that would change everything she thought she understood about the night she'd just survived. She stood there for a long time. Then she sat back down on the edge of the bed, set the coffee on the nightstand, and in the particular silence of a city that never fully went quiet, began preparing herself the way she had always prepared herself since she was 9 years old and learned that preparation was the only armor available for whatever came next. She was good at surviving. She was about to find out if that was enough. She didn't hear him come in. That was the first thing that unsettled her. Not the knock, not the voice, but the absence of both. One moment she was alone at the small table in the main room, both hands wrapped around her second coffee of the morning, and the next moment Alexander Bash was simply there, seated across from her, a manila folder open between them like he'd been there for some time, and had simply been waiting for her to notice. You move quietly, she said, force of habit. He slid the folder toward her. I need you to look at something. Inside the folder was a photograph, printed on plain paper, slightly grainy, the kind of image pulled from surveillance footage and run through software that cleaned up the resolution just enough to be useful. A man in his 50s, heavy set with the particular self-possession of someone who had never once in his life been told no and had built an entire personality around that fact. He was caught mid-stride somewhere that looked like a parking structure, not looking at the camera. Do you know him? Alexander asked. Arya studied the face. Something brushed the edge of her memory, not a sharp recollection, just a texture. The sense of a presence she'd registered and filed away without fully processing. Maybe, she said slowly. There's something familiar about him, but I can't place it clean. He might have come into the restaurant. Bar seating, I think. Lunch service maybe 3 weeks ago. She looked up. Why? His name is Richard Cale. Alexander's voice was level. He runs 3 legitimate businesses and one that isn't. He's been trying to acquire a piece of what I own for approximately 2 years through methods that have escalated in creativity over time. He paused. Victor was his. So last night wasn't random. Nothing in my life is random. She set the photograph down. He knows about me. By now, yes, he'll have had someone watching the restaurant. He'll know a female staff member interfered, and he'll know Victor didn't complete the job. He closed the folder, which means he knows there's a loose end. The word landed with weight she hadn't quite anticipated. Loose end. She'd heard the phrase 100 times in 100 contexts and never once applied it to herself. How loose, she asked. Marcus, standing near the window, said without turning around. Loose enough that going home tonight isn't an option. She absorbed this, set down the coffee. For how long? Until we resolve it, Alexander said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now. She looked at him for a long moment. At the steadiness of him, that quality she'd noticed at the restaurant, the way he occupied space without performing it. She was good at reading people. She'd built her survival on it. And what she read in him, sitting across from her with a surveillance photo between them at 7 in the morning, was not manipulation, not performance. It was a man who was used to controlling everything in his world, who was currently dealing with the specific discomfort of a variable he hadn't introduced and couldn't fully calculate. That made 2 of them. My sister, she said. 2 of my people are outside her building as of an hour ago, Marcus said. She doesn't know they're there. She doesn't need to. She's going to call me. Your phone is on the table in the kitchen. Call her back. Keep it short. Keep it normal. Don't tell her where you are. He finally turned from the window. Can you do that? Arya thought about Lily, 22 years old, studying for her nursing boards, making bad coffee and leaving her scrubs on the bathroom floor, and calling Arya every other day with updates about clinical rotations that Arya didn't fully understand but listened to with complete attention, because Lily's voice doing something it loved was one of the best sounds she knew. Yes, she said, I can do that. She made the call from the kitchen, standing with her back to the wall, out of a habit so old she no longer noticed it. Lily picked up on the second ring already mid-sentence about a professor who'd given an impossible quiz, and Arya listened and said the right things and told her she'd had to cover an overnight catering event and her phone had been on silent. And yes, she was fine. Yes, she'd eaten. Yes, she'd call again tonight. When she hung up, her hands were steady and her chest hurt in the particular way it did when she lied to Lily, which she'd done exactly 4 times in their shared adult lives, each one necessary and each one leaving the same small bruise. She walked back to the main room. Alexander was on the phone now, speaking in a low, rapid voice she didn't try to follow. Marcus was looking at her with an expression that she was beginning to understand was his version of concern, not performed, just present, like a shift in barometric pressure. You okay? He asked. No, she said, but I'm functional. Something in his face eased slightly, like honesty was a currency he respected more than reassurance. She sat back down. Thought about Richard Cale's face in the photograph. The mid-stride confidence of him, the practiced blankness of a man who didn't expect to be caught. She thought about what Alexander had said 2 years escalating, and she thought about what Victor's presence at that restaurant had me in. Not a crime of opportunity, a planned operation. Intelligence gathered position, confirmed asset placed. Someone told him Alexander's schedule. She said not to Marcus specifically, just to the room. In advance, with enough lead time to get Victor positioned in the security detail. Marcus looked at her. That's not a same-day leak, she said. Victor had to have been introduced to the existing security structure, vetted, or at least appearing vetted. That takes time. That takes someone close enough to the operation to move pieces like that without triggering red flags. Alexander had ended his call. He was listening. How long has Victor been on the detail? She asked him. A pause. 6 weeks. Who approved the addition? Another pause. Longer this time. That's the question, he said quietly. She looked at him. You already know, don't you? He didn't answer immediately. He stood up from the table and moved to the window, standing beside Marcus, looking out at something she couldn't see from where she sat. His back was to her, and from that angle she could read the particular tension in his shoulders that she'd learned in the last several hours was what restraint looked like on him. There are 3 people who could have authorized that addition, he said finally. One of them I've known for 18 years. One of them is connected to my largest current operation, and one of them is in this building. The room temperature seemed to drop. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, but the stillness of him changed quality, became the stillness of someone who had just heard something they already suspected and were deciding in real time how to carry it. Marcus, Alexander said, still facing the window. You authorized Victor. I did, Marcus said. The absence of defensiveness in his voice was either the most honest thing Arya had ever heard or the most terrifying. Walk me through the vetting. He came through the Harmon channel, same pipeline we've used for 18 months. References checked out, physical eval psych screen, background run by Doyle. Everything came back clean. Doyle ran the background, Alexander said. A silence. Doyle ran the background, Marcus confirmed, and now there was something in his voice, very small, very controlled, but there that Arya identified as the specific register of a person realizing mid-sentence the full weight of what they're saying. Alexander turned from the window. His face was composed, completely. Arya thought of a fault line, the surface perfectly still, and somewhere far beneath it, enormous pressure that hadn't yet found its seam. Get Doyle on the phone, he said. He's not going to pick up, Marcus said. I know. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialed, waited, shook his head. Get Chen to his apartment, Alexander said. Well, now. Marcus stepped out of the room, the door closed behind him. And for the first time since the restaurant, Arya was alone with Alexander Bash in a way that felt genuinely unmediated. No team, no structure, no procedural task filling the space between them. He looked at her. You should eat something, he said. You just found out someone on your team is probably a traitor, and your response is to tell me to eat something. The corner of his mouth moved, multitasking. She almost laughed. She didn't, but the impulse surprised her. Doyle, she said. Who is he? Alexander said quietly, and the correction he landed with finality. Head of Personnel Security, 12 years. He moved back to the table and sat down. Not heavily, precisely the way he did everything. He was responsible for background verification on everyone who had access to my schedule, my locations, my security configurations. Well, so everything Kale needed, Arya said, went through Doyle. Yes. For how long? That's what I need to determine. He looked at the closed folder on the table. 12 years is a long relationship. If he turned recently, the damage is contained. If he's been compromised longer. He stopped. The damage isn't contained, she finished. No. She looked at him, really looked the way she looked at people when she was trying to see past the performance to what was actually moving underneath. What she saw was a man who was good at containing things, good at the vault-like quality of absolute control. And what she saw beneath the containment was something she recognized from her own history, from the specific geometry of betrayal experienced at close range. Not rage, not surprise, grief. The quiet, matter-of-fact grief of someone who has been hurt by someone they trusted and knows that the hurt is real, even if there's no time to sit inside it. I'm sorry, she said. Just that. No scaffolding around it. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a person receiving something they hadn't budgeted for. Thank you, he said. Also just that. Marcus came back in before either of them could decide what came next. His face told her the answer before he spoke. Chen got to the apartment. Doyle's gone. Clothes still there. Car still there. Phone on the kitchen counter. He paused. There's a laptop. Chen's bringing it. He ran, Arya said. He ran on. Alexander agreed. Which means he knows Victor failed, she said. Which means Cale told him. Which means the communication lines between Doyle and Cale are still active as of this morning. Both men looked at her. If Doyle ran immediately after Victor failed, she said, pushing through the thought, he didn't wait to see if Victor would be questioned first. That means he knows that Victor under questioning would give him up. That means Victor knows Doyle. She paused. They know each other. This isn't just Doyle passing information to an outside buyer. This is a coordinated internal-external operation. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room in which something significant has just been said. She's right, Marcus said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him yet, something slightly rough at the edges, like emotion imperfectly managed. If Victor knew the name Doyle wasn't just a source, he was a participant. Alexander stood again. This time there was something different in the movement, a decision being made, a gear shifting. Pull everything from the last 6 months, he said to Marcus. Every personnel movement, every schedule leak, every operation that went sideways. I want a pattern. That's going to take time. We might not. Then start now. His voice was still even, still controlled, but the pressure underneath was closer to the surface. And I want Victor moved to the secondary location before anyone else knows where he currently is. Marcus left again. Faster this time. Arya sat with the understanding that the situation had just changed shape. What had been a targeted assassination attempt had just become something with roots, deep ones, running through 12 years of infrastructure. And she was sitting in the middle of it in yesterday's work uniform with a dead phone battery and her sister 2 miles away not knowing any of this. The laptop, she said, from Doyle's apartment. If the communication between him and Cale is on there, we'll know the scope, Alexander said. And if it's not, then Doyle was careful, which means he planned this for longer than we think. He looked at her steadily. Either way, it changes what needs to happen next. You mean it changes what you do about Cale? Yes. She thought about asking what that meant precisely. Decided she didn't need the specific answer to understand the general one. What does it change for me? She asked instead. He sat back down. Took a moment before he answered, and she had the sense he was choosing the honest response over the comfortable one, which she was beginning to understand was characteristic of him. If Doyle has been compromised for a significant length of time, he said, then Cale has a map of my operations that is far more detailed than last night's assignment suggests. He'll use that map. He paused. You stopped Victor. Cale doesn't know your name yet, but he will because Richard Cale does not leave things unresolved. He will want to know who intervened. And once he has your name, he has my sister's address, she said. Oh, yes. She was quiet for a moment. The cold in her chest was back, that specific cold that wasn't fear of dying, but fear of someone else getting hurt because of her. She'd lived with that particular cold a lot in her life. She hadn't missed it. Then I need to move Lily, she said. Already in motion, he said. Marcus has a location. Safe, clean, comfortable. She won't know why if you'd rather tell her it's something else. Arya stared at him. You're very fast. I've learned that hesitation is more expensive than action. When were you going to tell me? When you were ready to hear it. He held her gaze. I didn't want to hit you with it before you'd had time to understand the scope. She thought about being angry at that and at the paternalism of it, the unilateral decision-making. She turned the feeling over and found underneath the automatic resistance a bedrock of something she rarely let herself acknowledge from people she'd known less than 12 hours. She found that she trusted him. Not completely, not without reservation, but in the way she trusted her own body during a crisis, not because it never failed her, but because she had evidence. Tell me the rest of it, she said. Whatever you're still not saying, tell me now. He looked at her for a long moment, and then for the first time since the restaurant, he said something with his entire face instead of just his voice. Doyle wasn't the only name on the list I've been worried about. The sentence sat between them. There are 2 others, he said, people close enough to have moved pieces the way Doyle moved them. I've been watching both of them for 3 weeks, quietly, without either of them knowing. He exhaled barely, just a slight, controlled release that told her more than an hour of conversation had. Last night was not the first attempt. It was the third. Arya stared at him. The first one was 6 weeks ago, a car. My driver noticed something wrong with the vehicle before I got in. He kept his voice level throughout. The second was 2 weeks ago. A meeting location had been given to the wrong people. We changed the location 12 hours before, and the meeting went without incident. Whoopum, he folded his hands on the table. Each time, the information that enabled the attempt had to have come from one of three sources. And now Doyle is gone, which eliminates one possibility, but doesn't close the question because Doyle alone could not have managed all three. There's someone else, Arya said. There's someone else, he confirmed, and they don't know you're looking. No, but Doyle running changes that. Yes, the pressure was fully audible now, not through volume, but through density, everything in his voice compressed to its essential weight. Doyle's disappearance will signal to whoever is still inside that the timeline has accelerated. They'll know Victor failed. They'll know I'm looking. They'll need to decide quickly whether to run or to move first. Move first meaning a fourth attempt, he said, and this time with the understanding that I'm aware there's an internal problem, which makes them more dangerous, not less. Arya absorbed this, laid it out in her mind like a map. The pieces she had, the pieces she didn't, the shape of the space between them. You need to let them think you don't know, she said. He looked at her. If they believe their cover is still intact, she said they'll move on their existing timeline, which gives you the window to identify them before they act. She paused. But if they see you pulling records, moving Victor, asking questions, they'll accelerate or disappear. Like Doyle. Yes, he said, and then quietly, go on. So you need to be visible, she said. You need to appear normal. Continue your schedule. Take your meetings. Behave like last night was an isolated incident that's been handled. She looked at it on, which is extremely dangerous. It is. And you're going to do it anyway. I am. She looked at the table, at the folder with Richard Cale's photograph, at her own hands, which were steady as always, which she had always considered a kind of biological deception. Her hands reporting calm that the rest of her was not experiencing. Where do I fit in that plan, she asked. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that preceded something important. I want you to stay close, he said. Not as staff, not as a protected witness. I want you here with access to information, using the thing you have, the way you read people, to help me identify who's still inside. She looked up. You saw Victor in 45 minutes, he said, with no briefing, no background, no context. You identified a trained placement asset before 3 professional security operatives did. He leaned forward just slightly. I don't have another Doyle I can trust with this. I need someone whose loyalty to me is exactly 0 and whose judgment I've already seen under pressure. 0 loyalty is a selling point to you. Clean eyes are a selling point to me, he said. You have no history with these people, no relationships to protect, no financial ties. You see what's actually there. She sat with this for a long moment. Outside, somewhere into the building, she heard Marcus's voice, low, rapid, and the sound of a door. The laptop arriving, probably. The next piece of the picture coming into focus. She thought about Lily being quietly relocated by people she didn't know to a place she didn't know yet, for reasons Arya would have to explain at some point in some form. She thought about the straw wrapper. She thought about the pen in her apron and the decision she'd made before her brain had finished the vote. She thought about the fact that she had already crossed the threshold. Last night at the table, in the moment, her arm swung forward. There was no uncrossing it. The only question now was what direction to walk. I want 2 things, she said. He waited. Lily stays safe. Not just protected, actually safe. I want to speak with her every day. I want your word, not your logistics. You have it. And when this is resolved, she paused. I walk. Clean. No complications. No obligations. No strings attached to what I helped you with. I go back to my life. He looked at her steadily. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't fully decode, not disagreement, not calculation. Something closer to recognition. You have my word on both, he said. The door opened. Marcus came in with a laptop, and the particular expression of someone who has found exactly what they were hoping not to find. Doyle's communication files, he said, setting it on the table. He looked at Alexander. He was in contact with Kale's operation for 8 months. 8 months. Arya watched Alexander absorb this without flinching. Watched him take the number and process it, integrated into whatever he was building in his mind. 8 months of maps. 8 months of intelligence. 8 months of a man he'd trusted for 12 years, walking both sides of the line. "And the other name," Alexander said quietly. Marcus looked at the laptop screen, then at Alexander, then briefly at Arya. "You're not going to like it," he said. The room felt suddenly, specifically smaller. "Tell me," Alexander said. Marcus said a name, and the expression on Alexander Bash's face, controlled, composed, architectural, in its steadiness, cracked. Not completely, not visibly to anyone who wasn't watching the way Arya was watching, but it cracked. Just once, just for a second. Then it sealed shut again. And Arya understood in that moment that the war they were about to fight was going to cost him something he had not yet calculated the price of. She just didn't know yet if it was going to cost her the same. The name Marcus said was Daniel Rice. Arya didn't know who Daniel Rice was, but she knew what the name did to Alexander Bash, and that was enough. It lasted exactly 2 seconds, that crack in the composure, that hairline fracture in the fault line. Then it was gone, sealed back under the surface with a precision that told her this was not the first time he'd had to perform that particular act of self-containment. It was, however, clearly one of the harder ones. "Show me," he said. Marcus turned the laptop toward him. Arya didn't look at the screen. She looked at Alexander's face while he read, watched the controlled movement of his eyes, the absolute stillness of everything else, the way a person looks when they are reading something they already half knew and are now being asked to fully know. "How long?" Alexander said. "The earliest flag on the communication log is 11 months ago," Marcus said. "But there are gaps, encrypted channels we haven't broken yet. The full picture might be longer." "Who is Daniel Rice?" Arya asked quietly. Neither man answered immediately. Marcus looked at Alexander. Alexander kept his eyes on the screen for one more moment, then closed the laptop with a careful, deliberate motion and looked up. "He runs my Eastern logistics," he said. "Has for 9 years. He is also," a pause, barely perceptible, "the closest thing I have to a friend." The word friend came out of him like something he didn't use often and was aware of using now only because the precise weight of it was necessary for her to understand what they were dealing with. "Okay," Arya said, because there was nothing else to say and because he didn't need anything else right now. He needed someone who wasn't going to perform sympathy at him while he was trying to think. "If Rice has been communicating with the Kale's operation for 11 months, Marcus said, then everything we move through Eastern logistics in that window is potentially compromised. The Harmon Channel Victor came through, that runs east." "I know," Alexander said, "which means Victor wasn't just Doyle's placement. Rice helped move him." "I know. Which means Rice knew about all 3 attempts, possibly designed 2 of them." "Marcus," Alexander's voice was quiet and final and completely without heat, which somehow made it heavier than anger would have. "I know." Marcus stopped talking. The room held the specific tension of information that had just finished detonating and hadn't yet settled into its new shape. Arya sat with it. Let it sit. She had learned in the years of putting her own broken things back together that the first minutes after a significant revelation were not the time for action or analysis. They were the time for the thing to land fully before you tried to move it. Alexander stood up, walked to the kitchen. She heard water running. He came back with a glass of water he didn't drink and set on the table in front of him, like a placeholder for something else. "He was at the restaurant last night," Alexander said. The sentence hit the room like a stone hitting still water. "He was supposed to be in Baltimore," Marcus said. "He told me Baltimore. He was at the restaurant." Alexander looked at the closed laptop. "I saw him in the lobby when I arrived. He said he'd changed his flight, wanted to check in person. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought it was exactly what it looked like." "He was there to confirm Victor's position," Arya said. Both men looked at her. If Rice helped place Victor and helped design the operation, he'd want confirmation that the asset was correctly positioned before the window. He wouldn't trust a phone call for that. He'd want eyes on it. She paused. And when it went wrong, he was right there to watch it fail. And to watch you, Marcus said, looking at her. The cold came back, specific and clarifying. He saw me give the note. He saw you interfere, Alexander said. He may not have been close enough to see the note specifically, but he saw you act and he saw the result, and he is not a stupid man. So he already knows who I am, she said. He has access to the same personnel files we pulled last night, Marcus said. Yes. She thought about this with the systematic calm she used when fear was present but couldn't be useful. Rice had her name, he had her sister's address. He had 11 months of operational intelligence about Alexander's organization and the specific personal knowledge of a man who had been trusted at close range for 9 years. And he didn't know yet that they knew. You can't let him find out, she said. Not yet. Alexander looked at her. If Rice disappears like Doyle, you lose your inside line to Cale's operation, she said. Right now, Rice thinks the situation is contained on his end. Victor failed, Doyle ran, but Rice was at the restaurant in person. He saw what happened. He'll be assessing his exposure. He'll be in contact with Cale, which means every communication he makes in the next 24 hours is a map. We can't access those communications without tipping, Marcus started. You don't need to access them, Arya said. You need him to make them. You need him to stay comfortable enough to keep moving, which means Alexander has to call him. A silence. And say what Alexander said. Say last night happened. Say Victor's been handled. Say you're concerned about the breach in the vetting process, and you need Rice to come in to review the Eastern logistics chain because if Victor came through the Harmon pipeline, there might be other placements. She looked at him steadily. You're giving him a reason to stay close and a reason to believe you're looking in the wrong direction. And while he's looking at you looking the wrong way, Marcus finds the rest of what's on that laptop. The silence this time had a different quality, not the silence of processing, the silence of decision. She's describing a controlled burn, Marcus said, and his voice was careful. Yes, Arya said, if Rice suspects anything, then the situation accelerates regardless, and we're no worse off than we are now. She kept her voice level, but if he doesn't suspect you have a window, probably narrow, 24 hours, maybe less. Alexander was looking at her with an expression she'd seen once before at the restaurant after the tray when he was moving her from one category to another in his understanding. He was doing it again, recalibrating. You've done this before, he said. I've managed dangerous people in small spaces. She said, I learned the theory young. She meant her father. He understood that without her saying it, and she saw the understanding move through his eyes like a shadow, brief, respectful, not lingered over. Make the call, she said. He made the call. She sat 3 feet away and listened to Alexander Bash's voice. Do something she found genuinely extraordinary. Become completely naturally, unremarkably itself. No performance. No excess of warmth or excess of cool. He spoke to Daniel Rice the way a man speaks to someone he has known for 9 years, in trust without question, and there was nothing in his delivery that she could have identified as false, and she knew in the cellular way she knew things that this was costing him something enormous, and he was paying it without flinching because the alternative was worse. She could hear Rice on the other end, concerned, asking questions, expressing shock about Victor, about the breach, about the attempt itself. The performance was mutual, she realized. Rice was doing the same thing from his end. 2 men who had known each other for 9 years, both pretending, both aware on some level that something had shifted, neither willing to be the first to show the hand. When Alexander hung up, he sat without speaking for a moment. He'll come in at 3, he said. What did he sound like? Marcus asked. Like himself. Alexander's jaw was set, which is what made him dangerous for 11 months. Marcus moved to the laptop, started working. Arya stood up, moved to the kitchen, came back with the coffee that had been sitting too long and was now just warm enough to still be coffee, and set it in front of Alexander without comment. He looked at it, then at her. Thank you. Don't thank me. You're about to spend the next 5 hours watching a man you trusted pretend he isn't responsible for 3 attempts on your life. You need the caffeine. Something moved through his expression. Not the near smile this time. Something quieter and more unguarded. You're very direct. I've wasted too much of my life being indirect, she said. It doesn't actually make things softer. It just makes them slower. He drank the coffee. The hours between the phone call and 3 o'clock had a specific quality of compressed time, the kind where each individual minute felt ordinary, and the accumulation of them felt like something was being wound tighter and tighter toward a point of necessary release. Marcus worked through the laptop files methodically, reading aloud at intervals with the focus of someone building a case in real time. The communication between Rice and Cale's operation went back further than 11 months. 14 once they broke the first encryption layer, maybe more in channels they hadn't reached yet. The picture that emerged was not of a man who had been turned or pressured or gradually compromised. It was of a man who had made a decision deliberately with full understanding and had spent over a year executing it. He was going to move against the northern operations in 3 weeks, Marcus said, staring at the screen. Full transfer of logistics intelligence to Cale. Victor was just the opening move. Alexander didn't respond. He was reading something on his own phone. Alexander, but Marcus said, I heard you. There's more. There always is. He has a meeting scheduled with Cale directly, 4 days from now. If he makes that meeting, he won't make that meeting, Alexander said flatly. Arya had been quiet for the past hour, sitting with her own thoughts, listening and cataloging. Now she looked up. How are you going to play it this afternoon? Professionally, he said, that's not what I mean. I mean, does Rice know you well enough to read your face? A pause, yes. Then you need more than professional. You need to give him something, a reaction he's expecting. She thought through it. He'll be watching for signs that you're suspicious. The absence of any reaction might actually trigger more alarm than a visible one. You've just found out your head of security was a mole and your vetting process failed. You should look angry. He's expecting anger. I am angry, Alexander said. At Doyle, she said. Be angry at Doyle. Be angry about the process. Give him something real to read that points in the wrong direction. She held his gaze. You can do that. I watched you do the exact version of it on the phone. He looked at her for a long moment. You're very good at this, he said, and it wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more like an acknowledgement of a fact he wasn't sure how to categorize. I'm very good at surviving rooms where the official version of events doesn't match the actual one, she said, which is a skill I deeply resent having and which is apparently extremely useful in your line of work. Marcus made a sound that was almost a laugh and then immediately wasn't. At 2:40, Alexander went to change. At 2:50, a text came through on Marcus's phone. He read it, and his expression did something Arya had not seen it do before. It went very still, in a way that was different from his normal stillness. What? She said. He showed her the phone. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words she knows about Lily. Who sent that? She asked, and her voice was completely steady, and her heart was doing something structural. I don't know, Marcus said. He was already dialing. Chen, check on the sister, right now. Call me back in 2 minutes. He hung up, looked at Arya. It could be a pressure tactic. Or it could be Cale making a point, she said. Or it could be Rice who got to the apartment faster than we did. She stood up. I need to call Lily. Not yet. If Lily is fine and we call her with panic in our voice, we create a situation that isn't there. If she's not fine, a call doesn't help her. Marcus held her gaze. 2 minutes. Let Chen check. 2 minutes. She sat with them, counted them, felt each one separately. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from Lily's number. Hey, weird question. There's a guy outside the building. Older, been there a while. Should I be worried? One of Marcus's men. Still in position, still there, she breathed. She texted back. Don't worry, building maintenance. All good. Call you tonight. Sent it before she could second guess the lie. Marcus's phone rang. He answered, listened, said confirmed, and then stay there and hung up. She's fine, he said. Both our people are still on position. Then what was the text? Pressure, he said. Someone wants you rattled before 3 o'clock. She looked at him. They know I'm in this meeting. They know you are close to it, he said, which means Rice has already made contact with Cale, which means whatever today was going to be, it just got faster. Alexander came back into the room at 2:57. He looked at Marcus's face, then at Arya's. Tell me, he said. Marcus told him. What happened to Alexander's expression in those 30 seconds was not the fault line crack from earlier. It was something colder and more deliberate, the closing of a door, the turning of a key. Something shifted behind his eyes and settled, and when it finished settling, he looked like someone who had moved past the cost-benefit stage of a decision and arrived cleanly at the decision itself. "It's fine," he said. "It's not," Arya started. "It means Rice is running the play on both ends simultaneously," he said, "which is aggressive, but it's also a mistake because it means he's committed to today. He can't pull back without signaling. He has to walk into this room and perform." He looked at Arya. "So do I." "So do we," Marcus said quietly. "A beat." "She stays out of the meeting," Alexander said. "I agree," Arya said before Marcus could. "I'm more useful as a second set of eyes outside it. Is there," she paused, working the geometry of it, "somewhere I can be where I can see the room without being visible?" Marcus and Alexander looked at each other. "There's a monitoring station," Marcus said, "for the building security feed. You can see the meeting room from there." "Then that's where I am," she said, "and I want a direct line to Marcus during. If I see something, anything, I need to be able to move it immediately." "Agreed," Alexander said. He picked up his jacket, looked at her one more time with that measuring quality that she was beginning to understand was not calculation, but something closer to the focused attention of a person who was learning someone in real time and knew they didn't have the luxury of a slower pace. "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't," she said. "If it does, then you have my name, my sister's name, and 14 months of documented evidence on a laptop that's sitting on this table." She held his gaze. "Don't let it go wrong." He almost smiled. He didn't. He walked out. Bam. The monitoring station was small, and Marcus had set it up in under 4 minutes, which told her it was something he'd used before and maintained in working order. She sat in front of the screen, Marcus's second phone in her hand, direct line open, and watched the meeting room on the feed. Rice arrived at 3:02. She had expected, based on Alexander's description of a trusted inner circle member, a 9-year relationship, a man who had moved millions of dollars of logistics without raising flags, she had expected someone who looked the part. Polished, controlled. The architectural composure she'd come to associate with people who operated in Alexander's world. What she saw was a man who moved like someone who was managing a significant amount of internal noise. He was good at it, she'd give him that. His posture was correct, his greeting was natural, his concern about the events of the previous night was performed with genuine craft. But she saw it, the same way she'd seen Victor. Not in the obvious places, in the micro-adjustments. The way his hands settled on the table and then didn't move at all, which wasn't natural ease, but the deliberate suppression of movement. The specific direction of his gaze when Alexander said Doyle's name, not the direction of genuine shock, but the direction of someone accessing a prepared response. She pressed the call button. "His right hand," she said quietly when Marcus picked up. "Watch it. He's suppressing a physical tell." Marcus was silent for a moment. She could see him, slightly off camera, make an adjustment in his own position. The conversation moved forward. Alexander was extraordinary. He was angry, genuinely, visibly controlled, but present about Doyle, about the vetting failure, about the breach. He was asking the right questions, leading in the wrong direction, performing the version of himself that Rice had known for 9 years and trusted. And Rice was eating it. She could see it, the slight easing of the tension in his shoulders, as the conversation moved toward the narrative he'd prepared for. Then Alexander said, "Victor mentioned a secondary contact during questioning." Rice went very still. Arya sat forward. "He said the briefing on my schedule came through a third party," Alexander said, and his voice was exactly the same as it had been for the previous 20 minutes, level, tired matter of fact. "Not directly from Doyle, someone in between." Rice's right hand moved, very small, just a fraction, but she caught it. She pressed the button. "He's deciding right now whether to run or commit," she said. "Watch his feet. If he's about to stand." Marcus shifted on the screen. Rice did not stand. He made a decision. She could see it happen, the internal calculation completing the commitment landing, and he leaned forward instead. "Do we know who the third party is?" "Not yet," Alexander said. "That's why I need your help rebuilding the Harmon pipeline. Full audit, everyone who moved through it in the last year." A pause. Rice nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." "I need the access logs from the Eastern Clearance System." "Full archive. Can you get me those by tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely. And the manifest records from the last 3 logistics cycles." "I'll pull them tonight." Alexander nodded. "Thank you, Daniel." He said the name quietly, and there was something in the delivery that Arya heard, and that she suspected Rice heard, and that she suspected Alexander intended him to hear a weight beneath the normal weight of one. Not accusation, not warning, just the sound of a word being said for what might be the last time by someone who is still choosing to say it correctly. Rice stood to leave. He was 2 steps from the door when Marcus said without moving, "One more thing." Rice stopped. "The text that was sent to this building's line 40 minutes ago," Marcus said. "Do you know anything about that?" The silence lasted exactly 1 second too long. "What text?" Rice said. "Never mind," Marcus said. "My mistake. Must have been a routing error." Rice left. The door closed. On the feed, Arya watched Alexander sit back in his chair. She watched Marcus exhale. She watched the room hold its shape for a moment before anyone moved. She pressed the button. "He's going to call Kale in the next 15 minutes. He's shaken." The text question landed. "I know," Marcus said. "You have maybe 10 minutes before he realizes that question wasn't a mistake." "I know." "Marcus." "I know, Arya." She heard the shift in his voice. The move from managed to active. Something had changed in the room she was watching on screen, and she couldn't see it directly, but she could feel the change in frequency through the phone line. "What happened?" she said. "What did I miss?" A pause. "The access logs Rice just agreed to pull," Marcus said. "They'll show everything he's moved in the last year. Every transfer, every communication, every placement. If he pulls them honestly, we have our complete case. If he alters them, you'll know what he altered," she said, "which tells you what he's protecting most." "Yes." "So either way, we have him," Marcus said, and then quieter. "Come back to the main room. Alexander wants you in the room for the next part." She stood up. "What's the next part?" A beat. "Rice just called someone on his way out of the building," Marcus said. "Not Kale's direct line. A number we've never seen before. Chen is running it now." She felt the floor shift slightly under everything they thought they knew. "A new player," she said. "Or a very old one we missed entirely." She was already moving toward the door. Behind her on the small monitor she was leaving the feed from the meeting room showed Alexander still seated, hands folded on the table in front of him, looking at the closed door with an expression she was glad she couldn't see more clearly from this distance. Because she had a feeling it looked exactly like a man who had just confirmed the worst thing he already knew, and was now sitting alone with the full weight of it for the 30 seconds before the next thing started. She moved faster. The number Chen ran came back in under 4 minutes. That was the first bad sign. Clean numbers took longer. Numbers that came back fast because they were attached to something that the system already knew about and had already flagged, and the flag on this particular number was the kind that made Chen's voice go flat and careful when he read it out over the phone to Marcus. Marcus listened, said nothing for 5 seconds, then said, "Say that again." Chen said it again. Marcus hung up and looked at Alexander. "The number Rice called belongs to a shell company registered in Delaware. 3 layers of incorporation. It took Chen 4 minutes because the outer layer is on our watch list." He paused. "The inner layer connects to a man named Paul Greer." Alexander's face did nothing. "Paul Greer is in federal custody," he said. "Paul Greer was in federal custody," Marcus said. "He was released 14 weeks ago. Cooperation agreement. The terms are sealed." The room processed this in silence. Arya had walked in 30 seconds into Marcus's delivery. She stood near the door, still listening, running the name against everything she'd absorbed in the past 18 hours. She didn't know Paul Greer. She didn't need to. She needed to know what Alexander's body did with that name, and what it did was something she hadn't seen yet. Not the fault line crack of Race's name, not the cold, deliberate door closing of the text message. This was different. This was the specific stillness of a man confronting a variable that rewrote the entire equation. "What is he?" she asked. Zoe Alexander said for the second time in 2 days. He seemed to hear the echo of it himself. He ran the distribution for a competing operation. Aggressive, smart, genuinely dangerous. 2 years ago, he was picked up on a federal RICO charge. Open and shut, the evidence was overwhelming. He was looking at 25 years minimum. He stopped. "The case was built substantially on intelligence that came through my organization." "Through Doyle," Arya said. The pause that followed was 1 second long, and contained approximately 10 years of implication. Through Rice, wow, Alexander said. She stared at him. Rice provided the primary intelligence that put Greer away, Marcus said, and his voice had the quality of a man who was hearing himself say something and understanding its full shape only as he said it. Which means Greer inside a federal facility with access to lawyers and cooperation agreements, and 14 months to think eventually worked out where the intelligence came from. And made a deal, Arya said. And made a deal, Alexander confirmed. And when he came out 14 weeks ago, he didn't go to the authorities with what he knew about Rice, because what he knew about Rice was worth more than a prosecutor's gratitude. He was quiet for a moment. He went to Cale. Cale knew, Arya said. Cale already knew Rice was your man. Greer handed him that. And Cale used it not to expose Rice, but to own him. That's the shape of it, Alexander said. So Rice isn't just a traitor, she said. He's a man who's been owned for 14 weeks by someone who has documented proof that he helped put a dangerous person in prison, and that person is now free and is the one holding the leash. She worked through it. Rice doesn't have a choice. He never had a choice, not from the moment Greer walked out of that facility. The silence that landed after this was different from the previous ones. It had a human texture to it, the specific, complicated silence of people who have just understood that a situation is worse than it looked, and also more morally tangled than it looked, and also that neither of those things changes what needs to happen next. Does that matter to you, Marcus asked, and he was asking Alexander, not Arya. Alexander looked at the table. It matters to me as a fact, he said carefully. It doesn't change the operational reality. He's still a threat, Marcus said. He's still a threat. Alexander agreed. Arya looked at Alexander's face and thought about what it cost a person to say that about someone who had for 9 years been something close to a friend. She thought about the distinction he'd drawn. It matters as a fact, it doesn't change the reality, and she thought that was one of the lonelier sentences she'd ever heard a person say with complete composure. Where is Greer now? She asked. Chen's working on it, Marcus said. He's not in the city, Alexander said. If he were in the city, Rice would be more afraid. The call Rice made on his way out, that was a check-in, not a meeting request. He was reporting that the conversation went as planned, that I'm looking at Doyle, that the window is still open. He looked up, which means Greer and Cale are somewhere they can receive that information and act on it, and that somewhere is not local. The meeting in 4 days, Arya said, the one on Doyle's laptop, Rice, Cale, and presumably Greer in person. Yes, Alexander said. Then that's your window, she said. Well, the access logs Rice is going to pull, not the communication chain on the laptop. That meeting. She looked at him steadily. That's where all three of them are, in one place, operating on the assumption that you're still blind. It's also where all three of them are in one place with 4 days to prepare for the possibility that they're not, Marcus said. Which is why you have to move before the 4 days are up, she said. You have to let Rice go to that meeting, but you have to be there first. That's an ambush, Marcus said. That's a conclusion, she said. The distinction mattered, and she knew it, and she held it in her voice without softening it, because soft was not what this moment needed, and she had been in enough rooms with enough dangerous silences to know when a situation was asking for clarity over comfort. Alexander stood up. He moved to the window. She'd noticed that was what he did when he was processing something significant, that migration toward the boundary between inside and outside, as if proximity to a larger space helped him think in a larger frame. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, I need to know where Lily is. Arya blinked. What? He turned from the window. If Greer is involved, the stakes are different. Greer is not Cale. Cale is a businessman who uses violence as a tool. Greer uses it as a language. He communicates through it. His voice was steady, but she heard the weight beneath it. The text about Lily this morning, that wasn't Cale making a point. That was Greer introducing himself. The cold that moved through her this time was not the manageable cold of fear as information. It was the cold of something ancient and protective and extremely dangerous being activated. Where is she right now? She said. Marcus. She's at the secondary location, Marcus said immediately. I moved her an hour ago. She thinks it's a friend's place. Chen's wife set it up completely clean. Address, no connection to any of our operations. She's safe. Did she go willingly? Arya said, and her voice was doing something she didn't entirely have control. Over it was coming out very level, which was what happened when she was feeling the opposite. She was told there was a gas leak at your building, Marcus said, not without gentleness. She's annoyed, not frightened. She's watching television and texting someone about the nursing boards. Arya exhaled. I'm sorry, Alexander said. And again, it was the simple version, no scaffold, no performance. Just the words. Don't be sorry, she said. Figure out where Greer is. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she was beginning to recognize as the one he wore when she said something that aligned precisely with what he was already thinking, and he wasn't sure whether to be reassured or alarmed by that alignment. Chen, he said to Marcus. Marcus was already on the phone. What happened in the next 2 hours moved the way situations move when multiple things are developing simultaneously, and no one has the luxury of following any single thread to its natural end before the next one demands attention. Marcus coordinated 4 separate conversations while cross-referencing the contents of Doyle's laptop against the access logs they'd already been able to pull. Chen located a property registered to the same Delaware shell company that owned Greer's phone number, a house 2 states away purchased 11 weeks ago, 3 weeks after Greer's release. Alexander made 2 calls that Arya didn't fully hear, but whose outcomes she read in the shifting quality of his focus, something consolidating resources being moved into a position quietly and without flags. Through all of it, Arya sat at the table and thought. She was not a strategist by training. She was not a tactician by experience. What she was at her fundamental level was someone who understood systems of power and their pressure points from the inside, not abstractly, not theoretically, but in the specific embodied way that people understand things they've lived inside. And what she kept coming back to, circling it from different angles and finding the same answer each time, was this. The meeting in 4 days was the natural conclusion, only if Greer and Cale were planning to close the loop on Alexander at that meeting. But if the text about Lily this morning was Greer introducing himself, making a point about reach, about personal exposure, about the cost of resistance, then the meeting wasn't where they intended to end it. The meeting was where they intended to offer terms. They're not planning to kill you at the meeting, she said. Both men looked at her. They could have moved against you a dozen times in 11 months, she said. With Rice inside, with Doyle inside, with that level of operational intelligence, they had opportunities. They didn't take them. Victor was the first direct attempt, and Victor was sloppy compared to what they could have done with 14 months of preparation. She looked at Alexander. They don't want you dead. They want your organization. A pause. The transfer Rice was planning, Marcus said slowly. The logistics intelligence going to Cale in 3 weeks. That's not a destruction play. That's an acquisition play. They want to take over the Eastern operations intact, Arya said, which requires you to either step back voluntarily or step back involuntarily in a way that doesn't burn the infrastructure. Victor wasn't an assassination. Victor was a message. We tried this the hard way, and we can do it again. Now let's talk about the easy way. The meeting, Alexander said, is the sit down, she said. They're going to make you an offer, controlled exit. Your safety, maybe even terms in exchange for cooperation on the transfer. She paused. The text about Lily was the preview of what the leverage looks like if you say no. The room was very quiet. You're saying they think they have enough, Alexander said. I'm saying they think they have enough, she said. And they're partially right, which is the dangerous part. They have Rice, they have 14 months of maps. They have a man with documented history of federal cooperation who could be used to apply legal pressure if the other methods fail. And they have, she stopped. Say it, Alexander said. They have the fact that you don't want to burn Rice, she said. Not because of sentiment, but because of what burning him publicly costs you. The people who move through your logistics trust the operation's discretion. Rice going to trial. Rice talking. Rice becoming a public story that damages more than just him. Alexander looked at her with an expression that was completely unreadable for exactly 3 seconds. Then something in it shifted and landed somewhere that looked very quietly like respect. You understand this world very quickly for someone who was in a restaurant 48 hours ago, he said. I understand systems where the official story and the real story are different things, she said. The specific industry is new. The architecture isn't. Marcus set down the phone. Chen found Greer. He looked at Alexander. He's not 2 states away. The property Chen found is a relay communication address only. Greer is in the city, has been since yesterday morning. The temperature of the room changed. He was here before Victor, Arya said. He was here to watch. He came to see it done, Alexander said. He stayed to see what happened when it wasn't, she said. He's recalibrating. Everything I just said about the meeting being a negotiation, that was the plan before Victor failed. Now Greer is in the city, unscheduled, unannounced, and Rice just checked in by phone. She met Alexander's eyes. The timeline just moved. How much, Marcus said. I don't know, she said, but I wouldn't count on 4 days. Alexander looked at Marcus. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of two people who had been in difficult situations together long enough to have a shared language below the spoken one. Get Chen to find Greer's location in the city, Alexander said. Not tomorrow, tonight. And Rice, Marcus said. Alexander was quiet for a moment. Bring him in, he said, carefully, quietly. I want him to come in thinking it's routine follow-up on the access logs, something administrative. I don't want him spooked, I don't want him running, and I don't want Greer to know we've moved on him until it's too late to adjust. And when we have him in the room, Marcus said, I'll talk to him. Alexander said, Alexander, I said I'll talk to him. Quiet, final. He didn't make this choice freely. That matters to me, Marcus. Not to the outcome, but to how we get there. He exhaled once. I'll talk to him. Marcus nodded, stepped out. The room was briefly, for the first time in hours, just the two of them. Arya looked at Alexander. He was standing in the middle of the space, not at the window, not at the table, just standing in the particular way of someone who has been moving at speed and has been handed a 30-second pause and doesn't quite know what to do with the sudden stillness. You're going to give him a chance to explain himself, she said. Yes. Even though it doesn't change the outcome. Even though, he said. She thought about that, about the distinction between justice and procedure, about the small, important acts of decency that a person maintain, not because they changed the math, but because they were the difference between who you were when this was over. That's a good quality, she said. He looked at her. It's an expensive one. Most good qualities are. A silence that was for the first time not tense, not loaded with operational urgency or the weight of decisions pending. Just a breath between movements. Two people on the same side of something very large, taking 30 seconds to simply be in the same room without the room requiring anything from them. What happens after tonight, she asked. Not strategically, genuinely. After tonight, he said carefully, depends on what tonight gives us. If we have Greer's location and Rice is contained, and the access logs confirm the scope, we move. Fast. Before Cale realizes the board has shifted. He looked at her. And then, if what you said about the meeting being a negotiation is right, we change the terms of the negotiation. Meaning you go to him, she said, before he comes to you. Meaning I control the conversation instead of receiving it, he said. Yes, she nodded. And Lily stays where she is until Greer is off the board, he said. Then she goes home. With an explanation I'll leave to you to construct. I've been constructing explanations for Lily her whole life, she said, and there was something dry and tired and genuine in it that made him look at her with the particular focus she'd come to associate with him, deciding to ask something he might not have asked otherwise. What does she know about you, he said, the real version. She knows I grew up the same way she did, Arya said. She knows what I can do. She just doesn't know the scope of the situations I've walked it into. She paused. She trusts me. That's the part that costs me the most. He was quiet for a moment. She should, he said, trust you. I put her in protective custody because I passed a note to a crime boss, she said. You put her in protective custody because a man named Paul Greer sent a text message to frighten you into inaction, he said. There's a significant difference. She looked at him. He held her gaze without moving. You're very good at reframing, she said. I'm very good at accurate framing, he said. The two things look similar from outside. Before she could answer, Marcus came back through the door. He had the specific quality of motion that she'd learned to read as something significant now. Chen found Greer, he said. Alexander straightened. He's been staying at a hotel 2 miles from here, Marcus said. Checked in yesterday under a name that took Chen 3 hours to crack. He's not alone, 2 men with him, both with records. He looked at his phone screen. And he made a call 40 minutes ago to Richard Kale. The call lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a planning call, Arya said. That's what Chen thinks, Marcus said. He looked up from the phone. There's one more thing. The call Greer made to Kale Chen pulled the cell tower data. Kale's phone pinged from inside the city. The sentence landed. Kale is here, Alexander said. Kale is here, Marcus confirmed. As of 40 minutes ago, Kale, Greer, and presumably Rice are all in the same city, all connected by active communication lines with the access logs Rice agreed to pull sitting between them and everything they need. The meeting moved, Arya said. The meeting moved, Marcus said. It's not in 4 days. If Greer has been recalibrating since Victor and Kale flew in today. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Tonight, Alexander said. Tonight, Marcus agreed. Alexander looked at Arya, and she saw in his face the full convergence of everything they'd been moving toward since the moment she'd pressed a folded piece of paper into a stranger's hand in a restaurant, the entire architecture of the past 36 hours arriving at its single necessary point. Tell me what you need from me, she said. I need you to stay in this building, he said. I need you to have direct communication with Marcus at all times. And I need you, he paused, to trust that I know what I'm doing. She looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had moved Lily to safety before she asked, who had told her the truth at every point where a lie would have been easier, who had given her his word twice and in 36 hours had not broken either instance of it. I need one thing from you, she said. Name it. Come back, she said, simply, directly, the way she said everything that was true. Whatever happens tonight, come back. Something moved through his expression, something that didn't resolve into any category she had a clean name for. He held her gaze for one full second. That, he said quietly, I can do. He walked out with Marcus and the door closed, and Arya stood in the empty room with the laptop and the folder and the cold coffee and the full understanding that the next several hours would determine whether the choice she had made in that restaurant, the pen, the wrapper, the 11 words had been the bravest thing she'd ever done or the most costly. She sat down, picked up Marcus's spare phone, pulled up the monitoring feed, and she prepared herself the way she had always prepared herself since she was 9 years old and learned that the only thing worse than danger was being surprised by it, to watch and wait and be ready for whatever the night required. Because she had come this far on instinct and nerve and a childhood's worth of survival skills, and she was not going to stop now, not when it mattered most, not when it was finally irreversibly hers to see through. The first call came at 9:47 p.m. Arya had been sitting with the monitoring feed for 4 hours, Marcus's spare phone on the table beside her, a third coffee gone cold, and the particular alert stillness of someone who has been waiting long enough that waiting has become its own kind of action. She tracked what she could through the feed, the building's exterior cameras, the ground floor lobby, the secure entrance, and she'd filled the gaps with the information Marcus sent through in short clipped texts every 30 minutes, each one a single line that told her just enough to know the operation was moving and not enough to stop her from imagining the parts she couldn't see. Rice contained. Talking. Greer's location confirmed. Team in position. Kale mobile. Tracking. Then at 9:47 the phone rang. Not a text. A call. Marcus's number. She picked up before the second ring. Talk to me. Or Rice gave us everything, Marcus said, and his voice had the specific flatness of someone delivering a result that is simultaneously a victory and a wound. Full account. Greer approached him 6 weeks after the federal release, had documentation, communications, transfer records enough to put Rice in a federal facility for 20 years. Rice had 72 hours to decide. A pause. He decided to cooperate with Greer. In the 3 attempts on Alexander Mao, Rice confirmed all 3, provided logistical support for the first 2. Victor was primarily Doyle's placement, but Rice confirmed the security configuration. Another pause, heavier this time. He said he told himself nobody was going to get hurt, that the goal was acquisition, not elimination, that if Alexander just stepped back when the pressure got sufficient, it would end cleanly. Arya absorbed this. He believed that. He needed to believe it, Marcus said. There's a difference. She thought about Daniel Rice, 9 years of trust, a man backed into a corner by his own past, in someone else's leverage constructing a story about clean endings to make the next step possible. She thought about how human that was, how genuinely, specifically, tragically human. Where is he now? She said. Secure, he's not going anywhere. A brief silence. Alexander spoke with him. How long? 20 minutes. Marcus's voice shifted slightly. I wasn't in the room. She understood what that meant. 20 minutes alone between two men who had spent 9 years building something, one of whom had spent 11 months dismantling it. She didn't ask what was said. Some conversations didn't belong to anyone outside the room they happened in. Kale, she said, moving. Chen has eyes on him. He's heading toward the Eastern Warehouse District. That's the Rice Logistics Hub. That's where the meeting was supposed to happen. His voice tightened. He doesn't know we have Rice. He thinks he's walking into a handoff. And Greer left the hotel 20 minutes ago. A beat. He's not heading to the warehouse. She sat forward. Where is he going? The answer, when Marcus gave it, hit her like cold water directly to the chest. He's heading toward Chen's wife's address, Marcus said, the location where Lily is staying. Everything happened in the 10 seconds after that sentence. Her body stood up before her mind had finished processing. The phone was already at her ear. Marcus already talking. Chen's been redirected. 2 additional team members en route. Ite, 6 minutes. But 6 minutes was a number with weight, and she felt every pound of it. How did he find it? She said. Her voice was doing the steady thing. She hated it. She needed it. We don't know yet. The address was clean. No connection to our operations. We ran it 3 times. Marcus's voice was controlled, but she could hear something underneath it that she'd never heard from him before, the specific register of a man who has made a promise and is watching the margin on that promise get very thin very fast. Arya, Chen will be there before Greer. You don't know that. He will be. Marcus, you don't know that. She was already moving toward the door, reaching for her jacket. What floor is Greer on? Where is he in relation to Gonnehawa? Do not leave that building. But my sister has 6 of my people moving toward her right now, and you have 0 training in field operations. And if you walk out that door, you become a second problem I cannot manage. His voice was sharp and direct, and she stopped walking because it was the right voice for the right moment, and she knew it, and she hated knowing it. Stand by the phone. I will give you a direct line to Chen. You will hear everything in real time, but you stay in that building. She stood in the middle of the room. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, she did the things she'd learned as a child. She took the fear, she looked at it directly, she gave it its full weight, and then she set it to the side of her functioning mind where it could exist without running the controls. She opened her eyes. Direct line to Chen, she said. Now, son. The next 22 minutes were the longest of her life, and she had lived through some significant competitors for that title. Chen's voice came through, steady and low, a man narrating in real time, economical professional, stripping each update to its essential information. Greer's vehicle had stopped 2 blocks from the address. 1 man with him, the second having split off somewhere in the last mile, unknown position being tracked. Lily was on the 4th floor. Building had 2 exits. Chen's team had the primary covered second team 30 seconds out on the secondary. He's out of the vehicle, Chen said. Arya gripped the phone, walking toward the building, deliberately, no hurry. A pause. He knows we're not supposed to know he's here. He thinks this is clean. The second man, she said. Where is he? Still tracking. Last ping put him on the north side of the building. He may be going for the fire exit. That's the secondary exit. Second team is 30 seconds. Chen, he's faster than 30 seconds if he already has the layout. A pause. The sound of movement. Johnson north side now. Move. A brief silence that felt geological. Then, Johnson has eyes on him. He's at the fire door. Johnson is... Chen stopped talking for 1 second that felt like a puncture in time. Then Johnson has him. He's down, non-lethal. Arya exhaled. Greer is still approaching the main entrance, Chen said. He doesn't know yet. He's going to find out in about... She heard it through the phone, not loud, just a sudden compression of sound voices, movement. Greer's running, Chen said, and his voice had shifted into a different gear entirely. He made the team at the entrance. He's heading east on foot. I have 2 on him. Stand by. What followed was 45 seconds of sounds she interpreted by feel movement, brief, sharp voices, the specific acoustic texture of a situation being brought to its conclusion. Then silence. Then Chen slightly breathed for the first time since the call began. We have him. He's secured. She sat down on the floor, not dramatically, not with collapse. She just found that her legs had decided they'd done enough for the moment, and the floor was a reasonable place to be, and she sat on it, and she breathed, and she pressed the phone against her forehead and said very quietly to nobody, "Okay." "Arya," Chen's voice gentle for a man whose default was precision. "She's fine. Your sister is fine. She doesn't know anything happened. She was watching television." "Still annoyed about the nursing boards, Professor?" A pause. "I can check." Something in her chest broke open very briefly and then sealed itself back up. "Don't bother. Tell her I'll call in the morning." She paused. "Tell her I'm fine." "Will do." Marcus called 12 minutes later. Cale walked into the warehouse, he said, and his voice had arrived at a different place, something finished and quiet. Alexander was already there. She stood up from the floor. And the conversation lasted 9 minutes. A beat. "Cale is a businessman like you said. When the terms of the negotiation changed, when he walked in expecting rice and found Alexander instead with everything we'd compiled in the last 24 hours already on the table, he made the calculation he was always going to make when the math shifted." Another beat. "He agreed to full withdrawal, Eastern operations intact, all intelligence returned, documentation of Greer's federal cooperation agreement handed over to ensure his silence." "He gave up Greer," she said. "Faster than I expected," Marcus said, and there was something dry and tired in it. "Loyalty in his world has a very specific price point, and Alexander is on his way back. On his way." She exhaled. "Greer. Chen's people have him. The federal cooperation agreement Greer used to leverage rice cuts both ways. If Greer acts against a federal cooperation witness, his own deal dissolves. Alexander has documentation. Greer goes back to a facility, and this time the terms are significantly less favorable." A pause. "He knows that. He's not going to be a problem." She sat with the full picture of it, all the moving pieces settling into their final positions, the architecture of the last 36 hours arriving at its resting shape. Victor contained. Doyle gone but traceable. Rice broken but honest. Greer secured. Cale retreated. The Eastern operations intact. Lily watching television on a 4th floor, still annoyed about a nursing exam. "Marcus," she said, "Yeah. You kept your word." A silence. When he spoke again, his voice had the rough edge quality she'd heard from him once before in the doorway with the coffee when he'd let something through. "So did you," he said. "Every step." Alexander came back at 11:31 p.m. She heard the door and didn't turn around immediately. She was at the table, both hands around a coffee that was actually warm this time, and she gave herself the 3 seconds of not turning that she needed to put her face back into a configuration that didn't immediately communicate the full scope of the last 22 minutes with Chen on the phone. Then she turned around. He looked tired. Not defeated, there was nothing in Alexander Bash that read as defeat. She was beginning to think it was structurally absent from him, but the particular tiredness of a person who has spent an extended period operating at the outer edge of their capacity and has now been given permission by circumstances to feel that. His jacket was off, sleeves pushed up, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked his exact age, which somehow made him look more real than he had at any point in the previous 36 hours. He looked at her. "You heard about Lily. Chen kept me on the line." "I should have," he started. "You had Cale in a warehouse and Greer in the field and Rice in a room," she said. The order of operations was correct. He moved to the table and sat down across from her. Not with the careful deliberateness he'd used before, just sat the way a person sits when they're not performing anything. "She's all right. She's all right. The address leak, we found it. Doyle had a secondary file we missed on the first pass. Chen's wife's address was in Doyle's records from a background poll 18 months ago, completely unrelated to this situation. Greer found it through Doyle's archive." His voice was measured, but she heard the frustration underneath. The frustration of a gap in the system, a thing missed. I'm sorry, we told you the location was clean. It was clean from what you knew, she said. You can't protect against information you don't have. He looked at her. You're being generous. I'm being accurate, she said. Same thing, different delivery. A silence, not the weighted operational silences of the past 36 hours. Something that had more air in it, more room. How did it go with Rice, she asked. She kept her voice careful, not walking away from the question, not pressing either. He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, he said finally. It went honestly, which was what it needed to be. He looked at the table. He was not a willing participant. That doesn't absolve him of the participation, but it's a real distinction, and I needed him to know I understood it. He paused. I also needed to understand it myself. For what comes next, she said. For what comes next, he agreed. I have to decide what I do with 9 years of genuine history when the last 11 months of it are what they are. That's not a calculation. That's a thing I have to sit with. She nodded. She understood sitting with things. She had a graduate degree in it. Cale, she said. Gone, he said simply. He'll honor the withdrawal because the alternative costs him significantly more than the benefit he was pursuing. He's a businessman. The math changed. Something moved through his expression. He was always going to fold if the terms shifted. The problem was getting the terms to shift before he completed the acquisition. You got there first, she said. We got there first, he said, and the correction was quiet and completely deliberate, and she felt it land in the specific place he intended it. She looked at him across the table. At this man she had known for 36 hours and had spent those 36 hours inside the most concentrated version of she tried to find the word and found several, all of them, partial trust, proximity, shared danger, mutual precision. She had known people 4 years with less actual knowledge of them than she had of Alexander Bash right now. I want to go see Lily, she said, in the morning. I want to go to wherever she is and sit with her for an hour and let her tell me about the nursing board's professor, and I want to not have to explain any of this to her. You can go in the morning, he said, first light. And then I want to go home, she said, back to my actual apartment, my actual life, my actual job. She paused, which I may or may not still have given that I disappeared mid-shift on a Saturday. I've spoken with Dean, he said. She stared at him. When? This afternoon, between Rice and the warehouse. A brief movement at the corner of his mouth. He's been informed that a family emergency required your immediate departure and that any employment consequences will be addressed through channels he found persuasive. You called my floor manager. I told you I was good at multitasking. She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head very slowly. You are the most she started, and then she did something she hadn't done in 36 hours of crisis betrayal, fear, and a 22-minute phone call, spent waiting to find out if her sister was safe. She laughed, just briefly, just enough to feel the pressure release that it represented. Alexander looked at her with something completely unguarded in his expression, and she saw the real version of him underneath the composure, the man who existed when the operational layer came off. Someone who was warmer than his architecture suggested and lonelier than his competence showed, and who had just spent 36 hours watching a waitress from Chateau Verité navigate his world with a precision and clarity that he hadn't anticipated and hadn't stopped noticing. The second condition, he said, the one you named this morning, I remember it. I walk, she said, clean, no strings. Yes, he said, I gave you my word. She nodded. I know. Neither of them said anything for a moment. I also said, he continued carefully, that your best protection was proximity to the person most motivated to ensure his own survival. That condition, he paused, is now different. She looked at him. Greer is contained, he said. Cale is withdrawn. Rice is no longer a threat in either direction. The operational reason for your proximity no longer exists. He held her gaze and she saw him doing the thing she'd watched him do since the restaurant, choosing the honest version over the comfortable one. Which means your presence here from this point is entirely your own choice. The sentence sat between them. She thought about the straw wrapper, about the pen she'd picked up without deciding to, about the door she'd walked through without fully registering it as a door, about 36 hours that had moved like 36 days dense with information and consequence, and the specific irreversible quality of having been fully present for something that mattered. She thought about her actual apartment, her actual life, her actual job, the carefully constructed normalcy she had spent 7 years building one brick at a time against a childhood that had tried its hardest to leave her with nothing to build with. She thought about what it had felt like for 36 hours to use every single thing. She was every calibrated instinct, every hard-earned skill, every quality she developed in spite of, rather than because of the life that produced her, and to have those things be not just adequate, but necessary, not a liability, not a wound, a function. She thought about Alexander Bash saying we got there first. I'm going to see Lily in the morning, she said, and then I'm going to go home and sleep for approximately 1 geological era. That sounds right, he said. And then she paused. She held the sentence for a moment, felt its weight, set it down carefully. And then I'd like to have a conversation about what comes next. Not operational, not protective, just, she looked at him, a conversation. He looked at her for a long moment. The composure was fully present as always, and underneath it fully visible to her now, because she'd spent 36 hours learning to read the specific frequencies of him, something that was not quite relief and not quite anticipation, but held the essential properties of both. I'd like that, he said. She called Lily at 7 the next morning before she left. Lily picked up on the first ring, already mid-complaint about the pull-out couch at wherever she thought she was, and Arya listened to her sister's voice doing the thing it always did in the morning, which was arrive fully operational and slightly aggrieved, and she felt a tightness in her chest that had been present for 36 hours release, finally completely like a knot given permission to loosen. Are you okay? Lily said, hearing something in the silence. You sound weird. I'm fine, Arya said. I'll be there in an hour. Did something actually happen because the whole gas leak story felt thin? I'll explain when I get there. You always say that and then you explain like 40% of it. Lily, I'm just saying, I love you, Arya said. I'll be there in an hour. A pause. I love you too, Lily said softer. Bring coffee. Real coffee, not whatever Chen's wife has. It tastes like sadness. Arya hung up. Marcus was waiting by the door with a car already running. He held out a to-go cup of coffee without being asked. 2 of them, she said. He produced a second one from behind his back. She looked at him. How long have you known I'd need 2? Since about 3 a.m., he said. She took both cups and looked at this man, 50-something, silver-templed, straight-spined, the kind of steady that only comes from having been genuinely tested and having genuinely held. And she understood that whatever came next, whatever shape the conversation with Alexander eventually took, this was the person who had made the last 36 hours survivable in the specific, unglamorous, utterly reliable way that mattered most. Thank you, Marcus, she said, for all of it. He nodded once. You're going to be okay, he said. Not comfort, assessment. The specific delivery of someone who had measured the thing and was reporting the result. I know, she said. She walked out into the morning. The city was doing what it always did at this hour, pale light, early traffic, the particular freshness of air that hadn't yet been used by the full weight of the day. Arya Lane, 34 years old, a waitress from Chateau Verité, who had passed a note to a crime boss on a Saturday night and spent 36 hours inside the consequences, walked to the waiting car with a coffee in each hand and the full, clear, uncomplicated knowledge of exactly who she was. She was someone who couldn't look away. She had always known it. She had spent years trying to outrun it. She had swung a serving tray in a restaurant and written 11 words on a straw wrapper and walked through a door she couldn't walk back through, and on the other side of that door she had found not a disaster, but a version of herself she recognized was something that felt surprisingly like relief. The fear wasn't gone. The complexity wasn't resolved. Rice was somewhere being quietly held, Kale was somewhere doing his math, and Alexander Bash was somewhere in a building 2 miles behind her, making decisions about what 9 years of trust looked like when the math had changed. And Lily was on a pull-out couch waiting for real coffee, which was in the end the only fact that had ever truly mattered. Arya got in the car. The city moved past the windows, and she let it, and she held both coffees steady, and she did not look away from a single thing. She never did. That was the whole point of her. That had always been the whole point.